Hey, fifth graders. I'm getting ready to continue our story, Racing in the Rain by Garth Stein. This story is written, as we know, by Enzo the dog from his point of view. Obviously, the dog didn't actually write the story, but the author wrote it from his point of view. So as we go forward today, we're starting with chapter 30, and we're going to read through the end of chapter 34, working on page 156, starting out. And last we heard, Eve passed away. She had cancer, and she kind of knew the end was coming. She had one nice dinner with her family, and there's been some custody questions as far as who her and Denny's daughter Zoe was going to live with, either her grandparents or to stay with Denny. Denny's pretty adamant that she stay with him, which us as readers feel like that's probably the best case for her. I know Enzo feels that way. So, and as a reader, we tend to be on the side of our main character or our protagonist, who in this case happens to be Enzo the dog, and a close second would be Denny, his owner. So let's get back into the story. Last we heard Eve passed away, and Denny insists that Zoe live with him. Chapter 30, page 156. Zoe insisted on going to school the next day, and when Denny said he would pick her up at dismissal time, she complained that she wanted to play with her friends in the after-school program. Denny reluctantly agreed. "I'll pick you up a little earlier than I usually do," he said when he dropped her off. He must have been afraid that the twins would try to steal her away. From Zoe's school, we drove up Union to 15th Avenue and found a parking spot directly across from Victrola Coffee. Denny tied my leash to a bicycle stand and went inside. He returned a few minutes later with coffee and a scone. He untied me and told me to sit underneath an outdoor table, which I did. A quarter of an hour later, we were joined by someone else, a large but compact man, composed of circles. Round head, round torso, round thighs, round hands. There was no hair on the top of his head, but a lot on the sides. He was wearing very wide jeans and a large gray sweatshirt with a giant purple W on it. You could probably guess what that purple W stands for. "Good morning, Dennis," the man said. "Please accept my sincere condolences for your devastating loss." The man wedged himself between the metal arms of the other sidewalk chair by our table. He was not fat, and in fact, he might have been considered muscular in some circles, yet he was very large. "Good-looking dog," he said. "He has some terrier in him?" I lifted my head. "Me?" "I don't know exactly," Denny said. "Probably." "Good-looking animal," the man mused. I was impressed that he noticed me at all. "Let's get down to business," the man said. "This consultation will cost you an oil change. My Mercedes is very thirsty. An oil change whether or not you decide to retain me." "Fine," said Denny. "Let me see the paperwork," replied the man. Denny handed him the envelope Maxwell had given him. The man took it and removed the papers. "They said Eve told him she wanted Zoe to be raised by them," said Denny. "I don't care about that," the man said. "Sometimes she was on so many drugs she would have said anything," Denny said desperately. "She may have said it, but she couldn't have meant it." "I don't care what anyone said or why they said it," the man said sharply. "Children are not possessions. They cannot be given away or traded in the marketplace. Everything that happens will be done in the best interest of the child." "That's what they said," Denny said. "Zoe's best interest." "They're educated," the man said. "Still, The mother's final wishes are irrelevant. How long were you married? 6 years, replied Denny. Any other children? No. The man drank his latte and leafed through the papers. He was a curious man, full of twitches and extra movements. It took me several minutes to realize that when he touched his hand to his hip pocket, it was because he had some buzzing device hidden away. By touching it, he could stop the buzzing. The man's attention was in many places at once. And yet, when he locked eyes with Denny, I could sense the totality of his focus. Denny could too. I knew because in those moments, Denny's tension slackened noticeably. Are you in a drug treatment program? The man asked. No. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? Spent any time in jail? No. The man stuffed the papers back in the envelope. This is nothing, he said. Where's your daughter now? She wanted to go to school. Should I have kept her home? No, that's good. You're being responsive to her needs. That's important. Listen, this is not something you should be overly concerned with. I'll ask for a ruling by the court, and the child will be yours free and clear. Okay, Denny said. Don't panic. Don't get mad. Be polite. Call them and give them my information. Tell them all correspondence has to be directed to me as your attorney. I'll call their lawyers and let them know the big dog, that's me, is in your corner. My feeling is they're looking for a soft spot. They're hoping you'll go away quietly. Grandparents are like that. Grandparents are convinced they're better parents than their own kids, whose lives they already messed up. The problem is grandparents are pains in the butt because they have the money. Do you have money? Oh, do they have money? Plenty. And you? Oil changes for life, Denny said with a forced smile. Oil changes ain't gonna cut it, Dennis. My rate is $450 an hour. I need $2,500 retainer. Do you have it? A retainer means like upfront money to retain me or to hold. That word retain means to hold. And a retainer would be money to hold his spot as his lawyer. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Do you have it? I'll get it, Mark, Denny said. Mark sucked in his cheeks and nodded. Me to you, Dennis? We're talking about $7 or $8 grand to make this thing go away. You can do that, right? Of course you can. I waive my retainer for you, my friend. Waive means forgive. He stood up, and the chair almost stood with him, but he sucked himself out of it before it embarrassed him in front of the Victrola crowd. This is a totally bogus custody suit. I can't even imagine why they would bother to file it. Call the in-laws and tell them everything goes through me. I'll have my assistant on this today. They're playing you for a sucker, and you're not a sucker. Are you, champ? He cuffed Denny on the chin. Be cool with them, Mark said. Don't get angry. Be cool. And everything is in little Zoe's best interest. Got it? Always say everything is for her. Got it? Got it, Denny said. The man paused solemnly. How are you holding up, friend? I'm fine, Denny said. You're a good man, Dennis, Mark said. I'll take care of this. Of all the things you have to worry about, this is not one of them. You let me worry about this part. You take care of your daughter, okay? Thanks, replied Denny. Mark trundled off down the street, and when he had rounded the corner, Denny looked at me and held his hand out in front of himself. They were shaking. He didn't say anything, but he looked at his hands, trembling, and then looked at me. I knew what he was thinking. He was thinking that if he just had a steering wheel to hold on to, his hands wouldn't shake. If he had a steering wheel to hold on to, everything would be all right. Chapter 31. I spent most of the day hanging out in the garage with the guys who fixed the cars because the owners of the shop didn't like it when I was in the lobby where the customers could see me. I felt strangely anxious that day, in a very human way. People are always worried about what's going to happen next. On a normal dog day, I can sit still for hours on end with no effort, but that day, I was anxious. I was nervous and worried and uneasy and distracted. I paced around and never felt settled. I didn't care for the sensation, yet I realized it was possibly a natural progression of my evolving soul, and therefore I tried my best to embrace it. I want you to pause just for a quick second and think about a time maybe you felt anxious. Now is kind of an anxious, nervous time in our lives, and I think that embracing the feeling and understanding what we're feeling inside of that uncertainty is kind of important. So think of a time you were anxious. I'll let you pause there. You could put yourself in Enzo's shoes. One of the garage bays was open, and a sticky drizzle fogged the air. Skip, the big funny man with the long beard, dutifully washed the cars that were ready for pickup, even though it was raining. Rain isn't dirty. Dirt is dirty, he repeated to himself. A Seattle car washing mantra. He squeezed... Sorry, there's a mess up in the page here. He squeezed is a clump of sponge, and soapy water rushed like a river down the windshield. Oh, he squeezed his clump of sponge, and soapy water rushed like a river down the windshield off an immaculately cared for British racing green BMW 2002. I lay, head between my forelegs, just inside the thresholds of the garage, watching him work. The day seemed like it would never end, until the Seattle police car showed up and two policemen got out and walked to the lobby door and went inside. I nosed through the swinging door in the garage bay and into the file room. I wandered up behind the counter, which Mike was attending. "Afternoon, officers," I heard Mike say. "A problem with your car?" "Are you Dennis Swift?" one of them asked. "I am not," Mike replied. "Is he here?" Mike hesitated. I could smell his sudden tension. "He may have left for the day," Mike said. "Let me check. Can I tell him who's calling?" "We have a warrant for his arrest," one of the policemen said. "I'll see if he's in the back." Mike turned and stumbled into me. "Enzo, clear out, boy." I followed him into the back, where Denny was at the computer, logging invoices for the people who wanted their cars by the end of the day. "Den," Mike said, "there's a couple cops out front with a warrant." "For?" Denny asked, not even looking up for the screen, tapping away at his invoices. "You, for your arrest." Denny stopped what he was doing. "For what?" he asked. "I didn't get the details, but they're in uniform, and I don't think it's a prank." Denny stood up and started for the lobby. "I told them you might have left for the day," Mike said, indicating the back door with his chin. I appreciate the thought, Mike, but if they've got a warrant, they'd probably know where I live. Let me find out what this is all about." Like a train, the three of us snaked through the file room and up to the counter. "I'm Denny Swift." The police nodded. "Could you step out from behind the counter, sir?" one of them asked. "Is there a problem? Can you tell me what this is all about?" There were half a dozen people sitting in the lobby waiting for the invoices to be prepared. They all looked up from their reading material. "Please step out from behind the counter," the policeman said. Denny hesitated for a moment and then followed his instructions. "We have a warrant for your arrest," one of the men said. For what? Denny asked. Can I see it? This must be some mistake. The cop handed Denny a sheaf of paper. Denny read it. You're joking, he said. No, sir, the cop said, taking back the papers. Please place your hands on the counter and spread your legs. Denny's boss, Craig, came out of the back. Officers, he said, approaching them, I don't believe this is necessary, and if it is, can you do it outside, please? Sir, hold, the policeman said sternly, pointing a long finger at Craig. But Craig was right. People were there, waiting for their BMWs and Mercedes and other fancy cars. The police didn't have to do what they did in front of those people. They were customers. They trusted Denny. And now he was a criminal? What the police were doing wasn't right. There must have been a better way. But they had guns and batons, and they had pepper spray, and they had tasers. Denny followed their instructions and placed his hands on the counter and spread his legs. The cop patted him down thoroughly. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back, the cop said. You don't need handcuffs, Craig said angrily. He's not running anywhere. Sir, the cop barked. Hold! Denny turned around and placed his hands behind his back. The officer cuffed him. You have the right to remain silent, the cop said. Anything you say can and will be held against you. How long is this going to take? Denny asked. I have to pick up my daughter. That won't be necessary, the other officer said. I can pick her up, Denny, Mike said. Your daughter's in protective custody, said the policeman. What? Shouted Denny, his confusion turning to fear. Where is my daughter? An attorney will be appointed to you. Where is my daughter? Who should I call? Asked Mike. Call Mark Fain, Denny said, desperate. He's in the computer. Do you understand these rights as they have been read to you? Continued the policeman. Do you need me to bail you out? Craig asked. Whatever you need. I have no idea what I need, Denny said. Call Mark. He'll know what to do. Do you understand the rights as I have read them? Repeated the cop. I understand, Denny snapped. Yes, I understand. What are you being arrested for? Mike asked. Denny looked to the officers, but they said nothing. They waited for Denny to answer the question. They were well trained in the sophisticated methods of breaking down a subject, make him voice his own crime. Criminal negligence toward a child, Denny said. Abandonment, one of the cops clarified. I didn't abandon anyone, said the cop. Who's behind this? What child? There was a long pause. The people in the lobby were rapt. Denny was standing before them, his hands bound behind his back. They could all see he was a prisoner now. He had no use of his hands now. He could not race a car now. All attention was on the police and their black guns, sticks, and wands. It was true drama. Everyone wanted to know the answer to the question, what child? Your daughter, the cop replied simply. Without another word, the police took Denny away. Chapter 32. Much of what happened to Denny regarding the custody suit concerning Zoe, as well as the charge of criminal neglect, was not witnessed by me. These events spanned close to 3 years of our lives. One of the tactics of Maxwell and Trish was to drag out the process in order to deplete Denny of money and destroy his will. It was also intended to play off his desire to see Zoe mature in a loving and supportive environment. I was denied access to much information. I was not invited to attend any of the legal proceedings, for instance. I was allowed to attend only a few meetings Denny had with his attorney, Mike Fain, specifically those that concerned Victrola coffee. I did not accompany Denny to the police station after his arrest. I was not present for his booking, his arraignment, or his subsequent lie detector test. Much of what I tell you about the ordeal that followed Eve's death is a reconstruction based on information compiled by me from secondhand knowledge, overheard conversations, and established legal practices, as I have learned them from various television shows, most especially the Law and Order series and spin-offs. My intent here is to tell our story in a dramatically truthful way. While the facts may be less than accurate, please understand that the emotion is true. The intent is true. Chapter 33. They took Denny to a small room with a large table and many chairs. The walls had windows that looked out to the surrounding office, which was filled with police detectives doing their police work. Wooden blinds filtered the blue light and crept into the room, rippling the table and floor with long shadows. No one bothered him. After being booked and fingerprinted and photographed, he was put into a room alone and left there, as if the police had forgotten him entirely. He sat by himself. He sat for hours with nothing. No coffee, no water, no restrooms, no radio. No distractions. Alone. Did he despair? Did he silently scold himself for allowing him to be in that situation? Or did he finally realize what it's like to be me, to be a dog? Did he understand? As those slow minutes ticked by, and being alone is not the same as being lonely. I like to think that he was alone for that time, but that he wasn't lonely. I like to think that he thought about his condition, but he did not despair. And then the lawyer, Mark Fain, burst into the East Precinct on Seattle Capitol Hill. He burst in and began shouting. That is Mark Fain's blustery style, bellowing, boisterous, bold. Mark Fain is a capital letter B. He is shaped like the letter, and he acts like the letter. Brash, brazen, bullish. He blew down the door, bull rushed the desk, blasted the sergeant on duty, and bailed out Denny. What the heck is this all about, Dennis? Mark demanded on the street corner. It's nothing, Denny said, uninterested in the conversation. A charge of criminal neglect, Dennis? That's not nothing. It's a lie, said Denny. Is it? Did you leave Zoe to wander off alone? No. This is ridiculous, Mark said. I can't believe the district attorney would sign off on these trumpled up charges. You can't arrest someone for abandonment because he dropped his daughter off at school. Your in-laws must have powerful friends. Denny said nothing. I can get these charges dropped, Mark went on. But the custody suit and the temporary restraining order, still very dangerous. Denny ground his teeth. His jaw muscles bulged. My office, 8:30 tomorrow morning, Mark said. Don't be late. Denny burned. Where's Zoe? He demanded. Mark Fain dug his heel into the pavement. They got her before I could, he said. The timing on this was not an accident. I'm going to get her, Denny said. Don't, Mark snapped. Let them be. Now is not the time for heroics. When you're stuck in quicksand, the worst thing you can do is struggle. So now I'm stuck in quicksand? Denny asked. Dennis, you are in the quickest of all possible sand right now. Denny wheeled around and started off. And don't leave the state, Mark called after him. But Denny had already rounded the corner and was gone. Why do you guys think Mark would say, use that quicksand reference and say that when you're stuck in quicksand, the worst thing you can do is struggle? Why would he say that? Is he standing in quicksand? It talked about him digging his heel into the pavement, so it doesn't sound like he's standing on sand. So that's an analogy there. Go ahead and pause. You can comment down below or you can send me a quick message. Why do you think they use that analogy? All right, this is our final chapter for the day, chapter 34. Hands are the window to a man's soul. Watch in-car videos of race drivers enough, and you'll see the truth of this statement. The rigid, tense grip of one driver reflects his rigid, tense driving style. The nervous hand shuffle of another driver proves how uncomfortable he is in the car. A driver's hands should be relaxed, sensitive, aware. Seeing Denny's hands shake was as upsetting for me as it was for him. After Eve's death, he glanced at his hands often, held them before his eyes as if they weren't really his hands at all. He held them up and watched them shake. He tried to do it so no one else would see. Nerves, he would say to me whenever I caught him watching. Stress. And then he would tuck them into his pants pockets and keep them there, out of sight. When Mike and Tony brought me home later that night, Denny was waiting on the porch with his hands in his pocket. Not only do I not want to talk about it, he said to them, Mark told me not to, so... They stood on the walk looking at him. Can we come in? Mike asked. No, Denny replied. And then, aware of his abruptness, attempted to explain. I don't feel like company right now. They stared at him for a moment. You don't have to talk about what's going on, Mike said. But it's good to talk. You can't keep everything inside. It's not healthy. You're probably right, Denny said. But it's not how I operate. I just need to process what's going on. And then I'll be able to talk. But not now. Neither Mike nor Tony moved. They looked at each other, and I could smell their anxiety. I wished that Denny would understand the depths of their concern for him. You'll be all right? Mike asked. We don't have to worry about you doing something foolish. I'll be all right, Denny said. You want us to keep Enzo or anything? Mike asked. No. Bring you some groceries? Denny shook his head. He'll be all right, Tony said, and tugged at Mike's arm. My phone's always on, Mike said. 24-hour crisis hotline. Need to talk? Need anything? Call me. They retreated down the walk. We fed Enzo, Mike called from the alley. They left and Denny went inside. Denny and I went inside. He took his hands from his pockets and held them up to look at them shaking. Neglectful fathers don't get custody of their little girls, he said. See how that works? I followed him into the kitchen, and he went to the cupboard and took out a glass. Then he reached into where he kept the bottles. He poured a drink. It was absurd. Depressed, stressed, hands shaking, and now he was going to get himself drunk? I couldn't stand for it. I barked sharply at him. He looked down at me, and I looked up at him. If I'd had hands, I would have opened one of them and slapped him with it. What's the matter, Enzo? Too pathetic for you? I barked again. Don't judge me, he said. That's not your job. Your job is to support me, not judge me. He drank the drink and then glared at me, and I did judge him. He was acting just as they wanted him to act. They were rattling him, and he was about to quit, and then it would be over, and then I'd have to spend the rest of my life with a drunkard. This wasn't my Denny. This was a pathetic character from a lousy television drama, and I didn't like him at all. I left the room thinking I would go to bed, but I didn't want to sleep in the same room as the Denny imposter. This fake Denny. I went into Zoe's bedroom, curled up on the floor beside her bed, and tried to sleep. Zoe was the one I had left. Zoe was the only one I had left. Later, though. Later, though I didn't know how much, he stood in the doorway. The first time, oh, the first time I took you for a drive in my car when you were a puppy, you puked all over the seat, he said to me. But I didn't give up on you. I lifted my head from the ground, not understanding his point. I put the booze away, he said. I'm better than that. He turned and walked away. I heard him shuffle around in the living room and then turn on the TV. So he didn't fall asleep hopelessly, the refuge of the weak and the sad. He got my point. Gestures are all that I have. I found him on the couch watching a video of Eve, Zoe, and me. It was from years ago when we went to Long Beach on the Washington coast. Zoe was a toddler. I remembered that weekend well. We were all so young, it seemed, chasing kites on the wide beach that went on for miles. I sat next to the couch and watched, too. We were so naive. We had no knowledge of where the road would take us, no idea that we would ever be separated. No race has ever been won in the first turn, he said, but plenty of races have been lost there. I looked at him. He reached out, settled his hand on the crown of my head, and scratched my ear like he always had done. Yes, the race is long. To finish first you must finish. And that's where we're going to stop today. Hopefully I'll see you guys today at the teacher parade. It starts at 11:15-ish and goes to about 12-ish. So watch for me and the puppies, who will not be as sleepy as they are right now. We're going to be in my gray Jeep, and I'll see you shortly.